Okay, we are now, this is the laws week 3, looking at kind of a sampling of the laws that are found in the book of Exodus. This will be our last week in the laws. I mentioned before, we're going to be looking at Exodus 22, 28 through 30. I mentioned before at the beginning that it's well worth your time to go back through and read all of Exodus, read through all the laws. We're just not going to take the time to delve into every law and all the details, but we want to take a bit of a survey, a bit of a sampling of them. And we are going to do the same thing with the tabernacle and the things that are built, and the furniture that goes within the tabernacle and all that. We won't look at it in detail, but we'll do something similar that we've been doing with the laws. All right. So let's begin reading Exodus 22, chapter 22, 28 through 30. Would somebody like to read that? It's not very long.
Okay.
Okay, go for it.
You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with its mother. On the 8th day you shall give it to me.
All right. So how is honor for God connected with honor for rulers? How is honor for God connected with honor for rulers?
Leaders. It's your leaders.
Okay, it's leaders. They've got authority. Okay, that's true. That's true. They've got authority. They're leaders. How else? How is it connected? It says you gotta honor your leaders. You gotta honor those who are in authority. You're gonna respect them. You're gonna submit to them. But how is it connected? Other than their leaders, how is it connected with God and honoring Him? How is it connected with honoring God?
Our rulers are provided by God. God sees to those that are in charge of us here on earth.
Yes, that's right. So could we say that, would it be fair to say that those who are in positions of leadership are put there by God?
Yes.
Well, we're talking about Exodus for the moment.
So at this time, then I would say yes.
Okay. What did Jesus say to Pilate when Pilate said, "Don't you know I have authority to crucify you or let you go?"
Only authority you have came from the Father.
Right. Paul and other New Testament writers will say that people are in those positions, that they're given by God, rulers and things like that, that there ought to be respect for them. That doesn't mean that they honor God. God is going to take care of that. But in some sense, at least New Testament back to Exodus, we could talk about whether that's still going on today, but at least in the New Testament period of time, and then back to Exodus, all the way back, in some sense, God is the one who is appointing people as leaders. Doesn't mean they're always going to be godly, does it? No. But it does mean that they are in those positions, or at least those positions are given by God in some form or fashion. So when specifically here in Exodus, God is the one who is appointing his leaders. And so they need to take care and listen to them. There's a concept of the lesser to the greater that's going on as well. As we see, not only is God the one who is providing these leaders and they need to submit to him, but if someone will not honor a lesser authority figure, are they more or less likely to honor other authority figures?
No.
Usually they don't. If somebody will not honor their father and mother, they're probably not going to honor the police, right? At least they'll try not to get involved with the police maybe, but will they honor and respect them? Probably not. Governments, judges, probably not. They may not want to get in trouble and go to jail or something like that, but honor and respect, probably not. So in some ways, there's the lesser to the greater. We are honoring God when we honor those who are in positions of leadership, especially here, Israel. When they honor their leaders, they are honoring God. God is the one who put them in those positions. God is the one who's glorified. God has said, you need to submit to these lower level authorities. And by doing that, they are in essence submitting to God, the one who put them in those positions. Now, there's a similar thing we could talk about in the church. Has God assigned and appointed people to who have authority over the church?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I was worried there for a minute. The church is it's all about anarchy. That's not true. And so the same thing would be true within the church. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Honor and respect those who are in positions of authority, and those would be the shepherds, right? Those would be the elders. They are meant to shepherd the flock for God. So there's submission as well. And when we submit when Israel submitted, when we in the church submit to those who are in positions of authority, we are submitting to and we are honoring God. Has God set up authority figures in the home?
Yeah.
If we submit and respect and honor the authority figures in the home, who are we honoring and respecting? No. So you see how this is all connected. God is a God of order. And there's certain things that are orderly, and those who are in positions of authority are meant to be submitted to. And of course, those who are in those positions are meant to act like God in the sense of being kind and caring and all of those kinds of things. But even through the government, there's positions of authority. And Paul and other New Testament writers will say that we need to submit to those who are in authority. We may not like them. Listen, Rome was not a Christian government in the time of Paul and Peter. In fact, they were persecuting and murdering Christians, and yet there's still this authority. So the point is, God is the one who puts this issue of authority into our whole life, the human experience. There's order and there's authority and all of that. And they were meant to honor God by honoring those he had put in positions of authority. We should be doing the same thing as well today. All right. All right. So why is it important for the people of God to quickly offer what he has commanded them and what is expected? Because there's a section in there talks about offering quickly the things that you need to offer.
Well, this is just an opinion.
Okay.
I don't know nowhere. But when you're talking about fruit or whatever, or an animal or something, if you're giving it over within that first 7 days, then it's still new, it's unblemished, it's
Okay.
untainted.
Okay. All right. Yeah. It's still new, unblemished. Go ahead.
Because you might change your mind.
Exactly. The longer you hold on to it, the harder it becomes to give it.
It's the same today. You're giving, if you don't make a commitment that that's what you're gonna do, and you do it when you first get your check. When you get to the end of the week or the end of your pay period, you might need something that you don't really have to have.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The longer you hold on to it, the easier it becomes to start saying, oh, well, I really need this. And maybe you do by that time, right? Maybe you've spent all the money you had. Maybe you slaughtered the animals, whatever. You've used it up and you're like, I guess not. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I like what you had to say though about the unblemished, and there's probably something in there as well. The idea of giving of your first fruits and of the animals, those kinds of things. But there's also that concept of do it quickly. Otherwise, you might change your mind and you might have a hard time giving it up. Now, why does God want the firstborn? Because he talks about the firstborn of the animals. Why does God want the firstborn?
It's usually the best.
Okay, it's usually the best.
I didn't catch
I
that.
have some problems talking about firstborns as being the best.
If it's on one, then that's what I mean,
If there's only one, it is the firstborn.
but during this time period, the firstborn held a special place.
Very true. Firstborn had culturally, they held a very special position. In fact, if you had more than one child and you had an inheritance, the firstborn got a double portion. So if you had two kids, you split it up three ways, and the firstborn got two of those, portions. And if you had more, you would do the same thing. You kind of added one, and they got a double. They got a double portion of it. What else, though?
Wasn't it his responsibility though to see to the household? I mean, he had responsibilities. He wasn't just getting twice as much.
Oh, sure. There was definitely responsibilities for it, but they definitely got privileges as well. And it was seen as special.
And God also gave, not that he had more than, but God also gave his firstborn.
Well, that's true. And so there is a picture of Jesus in the firstborn elements. All of that is a picture of Jesus. But there's also something that happened in the recent history of Israel in Exodus.
Passover.
True. And what was the Passover? That's right. The firstborn died. So, and again, that's pointing us forward to Jesus. That's true. And everything we talked about the firstborn is all true. But in Israel's recent history, there was the death of the firstborn. And so God is reminding them, I saved you. That all the firstborn are mine. I saved you. You were ransomed. You were redeemed. So all the firstborn are mine. And so there's that connection there as well. And of course, it's the very best. But God deserves the very best. Isn't that right?
Yes.
We should give him our very best. And that should be the very best of everything, right? The animals and those kinds of things were a token of your entire life. All I have is yours, is really what it was meant to say. But again, it points us to Jesus. There's a lot of symbolism there. All right, let's continue reading Exodus 23, 1 through 8. Exodus 23, verses 1 through 8. And this text says this. It says, you shall not spread a false report. You should not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You should not fall in with the many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit siding with the many so as to pervert justice, nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. You shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in his lawsuit. Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. And you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted, and subverts the cause of those who are in the right. Okay, so what is the overall thrust or theme of this section that we're looking at? What's kind of the big picture of what's going on in this? I mean, what's the big subject?
Right. Doing what's right and justice.
Doing what's right and justice. Mike, you said treating others well, or how you treat them. Yeah, the big concept is justice. It's about doing right, acting justly. Why is it important for people, the people of God, to be honest when it comes to things like court cases? And specifically, there's kind of court cases that are being talked about here. Why is it important for God's people to be honest when it comes to court cases?
Well, whenever you're taken into court, you want people to do you the same way.
Okay, that's true. You will do unto others as you would have them do to you. That's true. What else?
we are, I mean, it says in the New Testament, I don't know about the Old Testament, we're ambassadors to Christ. And so the world sees God and Christ through us and our actions and the things that we do and refuse to do and attempt to do. Speaks a lot of what we believe and what we say and do.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And even Israel was said to be a holy nation, a royal priesthood. They were meant to be a light to the nations. So yeah, there's even in that sense that they are meant to be an example to the nations around them. That's true. The reality is God is a God of justice, isn't he? Is our God a God of justice?
Yes.
Yeah. And he wants his people to be the same. He wants his people to be like him. And if he is a God of justice and holiness and righteousness, his people ought to reflect that. He wants them to live in accordance to what is just and right. He's also looking out for who? In this text here in Exodus that we looked at, who's he looking out for?
Poor man.
The poor. The poor, absolutely. He's looking for the poor, the outcast. The poor person can't pay a bribe. The rich could. The rich could pervert justice, couldn't they? We even see that today, don't we? No, sometimes we see the rich paying people off to get things done, even in court cases. They pervert justice. The poor can't do that. They can't pay a bribe. And so justice would be, would go out the window for them. It'd be injustice for them. So God doesn't, and he talks about not taking bribes or making bribes and things like that because it clouds the sight. Yeah, absolutely. You got a judge who gets a bribe of, I don't know, $50,000. That might sway him a little bit on whether or not you're going to get your lawsuit done. And the same would happen in the ancient cultures. Go ahead, Paul.
In verse 2, he says the reverse. Do not, in this translation, he says, do not show favoritism to a poor man.
Yes, the concept would be that you are showing favoritism in the sense of making a distinction between peoples. God is not right. So it's that kind of concept. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I know, having worked for a very large company for a number of years, they very seldom would go to court for this very reason, because a jury will show favoritism to someone who's not as wealthy rather than justice.
Yeah, you're right. There could be that concept there. I forget what the text said here. Let me go back here. You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with wicked man to be malicious witness. You shall not fall in be a witness in a lawsuit, siding with others who pervert justice. Be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit, right? So yeah, yeah, you don't want to show favoritism in any regard. You don't want to bribe the judge so that justice is perverted, but you also wouldn't want to favor the downcast, the person who looks, is poor or looks beat up or whatever, just because of the outward look of them. So it goes both ways. God is saying you need to judge based on truth, yeah, and not on any other circumstances. But that again goes back to the nature and character of God, doesn't it? God is a God of justice. He's not a respecter of persons. It doesn't matter. He's looking for truth, and his people should be looking for truth as well. Where did we get here? Now I got to catch back up. All right. All right, so what does God say about a person who meets the animal of his enemy on the road? Wandered away or something.
Take the
They-
animal, take care of it. Don't treat it any different than your friend.
Yeah, don't treat it any different. Take care of it, bring it, return it. Don't keep it. You might think that way, right? Wow, finders keepers, losers weepers. I don't know if you know that. That's a real thing, at least in Massachusetts. I don't know if it's a thing down here, but if you find it, it's yours, right? God's not okay with that. But notice that he doesn't say if you find your friend's cattle or your friend's donkey. He says your enemy.
Enemy.
Well, maybe. You got to ask your friend. But notice that it's your enemy, though, because you would tend to do good to those who like you and those who are your friends. We tend not to rob our friends. I mean, hopefully we tend not to rob anybody, but usually you're not going to rob or defraud or be abusive to your friends. Otherwise, they're not going to be your friends very long. But your enemy, it's a lot harder to be kind to your enemy, isn't it?
Oh, no.
So you see your enemy's animal. Be very easy to leave it, wouldn't it? And maybe not do anything. Let it fall in a ditch, break its leg, whatever, good for him, or her, or whatever that's their animal. I don't have to worry about it. God says, not true. Somebody's at your door. We have the same thing. The ring door chime. Mine's much lower than that, so I knew it wasn't mine. Very hard to do that, though. Far easier to either take it or who knows. There's all kinds of things you could do. And yet God says, even if your enemy's animal is out there, you need to return it. If someone's your enemy, again, it's hard to do good to them. It's not something that we want to do. What did Jesus say about those kinds of things? What did he say about your enemies?
Love your enemy as yourself.
Love your enemy as yourself.
Love them.
Love them. Do good to those who
Persecute you.
persecute you, despitefully, what'd you say, despitefully use you? Yeah, despitefully use you. So Jesus is really saying what Yahweh said in the Old Testament. We talk about Jesus as Yahweh, but he's not making something new up. He's kind of reiterating some truths that were always there that maybe the people of God had forgotten. Do we forget this truth? We ignore it? We not like it? We do the opposite of it?
Not that I have that problem, but I know people with.
So this Bible class is for someone else. Remember, there's always 3 fingers pointing back at you when you point at someone else. So, well, you can stay after class. We'll talk. Yeah, I think if we're honest, we may not like it. Hopefully we don't like when we act bad. Hopefully we don't rejoice in bad things that happen to even people that we don't like, who we think are our enemies or whatever. But it can be a struggle. But this is, again, being like God, isn't it? Right? This is what God is calling his people to. He's called them way back in the Old Testament. He's continuing to call his people to do the same kinds of things. So not all of us have cattle. Some of us do, but not all of us have those kinds of things. But it doesn't matter. It's how do you treat one another? It's how do you treat people? Even somebody you think is your enemy, you're meant to treat them the way Christ has treated you. That he died for his enemies, even while we were his enemies. Christ died for us, the ungodly. So important truths here that are found even in the Old Testament. Okay, let's look at this. I think this is the last passage we want to look at tonight. Exodus 23, we'll look at verses 10 through 12. It says, "For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your servant woman and the alien may be refreshed. Okay, so why are the people to leave the land, their fields? Why are they supposed to leave it resting for a year?
Crops take nutrients out of the soil and need to be built back up.
Okay, crops take nutrients, you got to leave it, it's got to build back up. According to Exodus, though, this passage we're looking at, because that is true. That's true. It's not that's a true thing that we find.
But you know, it seems kind of funny though that we're gonna feed the poor every 7 years.
Yeah. Well, there is stipulations elsewhere that you don't harvest all the way to the edge of your fields. You leave it for the poor, right? Think about Ruth, go out gleaning, that kind of stuff. So, but now you got a whole year of a whole field.
But I also think this whole back to the giving your animals within the first 7 days, or you know, after the 7 days, and now you have the stuff. I think the theme of 7 is following through here too, though.
Very true.
The 7 days of creation and the,
Very true.
you know, the 7 days. I mean, the first thing I thought of when it said on the 8th day, wasn't it the 8th day that they circumcised the
Yes.
babies? So I think that that's probably
Which is what day of the week?
the 8th day.
Uh-huh.
Monday.
Would be the first day of the week, wouldn't it?
Well, I suppose
You
that's-
go
because
back
that's strong.
around, don't you?
Oh,
The 8th day is, and we don't have time to unpack this tonight, but you brought it up, so I'll throw it out there as a tidbit. The 8th day is symbolic of new creation. It's symbolic of starting over, but starting over anew, afresh. Children are circumcised on the 8th day. Yes, there's medical reasons. God knows what he's doing, but there's also symbolism to talk about. Remember, this stuff is pointing us to Jesus. This stuff is pointing us to new creation, this new life in Christ, all that kind of stuff. So yes, 7 is very important, very symbolic. The question is, though, does God care for the poor?
well, yeah.
Yeah, and we see it over and over again, don't we? God cares for the poor. Okay, so if God cares for the poor, how should God's people treat the poor? Right, that's a no-brainer, right? It should be a no-brainer. Should be a no-brainer. We should be doing the same kinds of things. God's people in Exodus, they were meant to be trained. God is training them to be like him. God is training them to live out the truths of who God is. And of course, these things get carried over for us as well. So what does God say about the Sabbath now in this section? Because he talks about the 7th day, the Sabbath. What's he say there?
Rest. That's a day of rest.
Day of rest. It's a day of rest for who?
Everybody.
Everybody, and even your animals. It's a day of rest for absolutely everybody. So was the purpose of the Sabbath to hinder and to bind people and make it a burden for them?
Say that again.
Was the Sabbath meant to be a hindrance, a burden, something difficult?
No, it's supposed to be a day of rest.
It's supposed to be
It's supposed to be holy.
something good, though, isn't it? It wasn't like God was taking away and saying, I'm going to punish you for a day. That's what it eventually becomes, though, doesn't it? In Jesus' time, it became a day of a burden, didn't it? It was
Yes.
kind of like a punishment. People had added all kinds of laws and regulations and rules to the Sabbath. It became a heavy weight. That was not the way it was meant to be. Remember, Jesus said the Sabbath was made for man, not man.
Man for the Sabbath.
Man doesn't serve the Sabbath. The Sabbath was there to serve man. And we can think about, first of all, we need rest. Isn't that right? I don't know if anybody was tired today, but Man, I was tired today. I was like, whew, gotta get, I almost drank a cup of real coffee in the afternoon so I could get through it, but I didn't. Well, we need rest. But not only that, you've got God who rescued a slave people. Remember, we're in Exodus. These people were slaves. They didn't have a day off. They needed to learn what was rest. They needed to learn. And of course, there's symbolism, isn't there? Symbolism pointing us to Jesus, because Jesus is crucified on the sixth day, on Friday. He rests in the tomb on the Sabbath, Saturday, and he rises on the first day of the week, the new creation, day 8, you could say, which again is pointing us forward to our Sabbath. We have a Sabbath in Jesus, a rest in Jesus right now, but we are also headed towards our eternal rest, our eternal Sabbath. So there's a lot going on there as well. But it was a day of rest, relaxation, refreshment for everybody. Everybody needed it, and even the animals. All right, so we'll finish with this. We're running out of time. What can we learn from these passages about God and his laws for the Israelite people? What is the purpose of God giving them these laws that we're looking at? Is it simply so that God can oppress them with all kinds of laws?
No, it's to help them instead of hurt them.
Help them instead of hurt them. Absolutely. You're going to say something, Mike?
Just that it's based on love.
It's love.
Comes up, put God first and your neighbor, those two commandments.
That's right.
That,
love God and love your neighbor. Yeah, absolutely. That sums up all the laws. But God is not, sometimes we look at the laws, the Old Testament laws, sometimes we look at them as a bad thing. We may or may not consciously think of it, but we think, oh, we're not under the laws. Well, we're not under the old covenant laws, but
In our generation and society, some of these laws we look back now, I mean, they do seem burdensome and rigid.
Sure.
Yes.
they do. But is that the purpose? No, it's a freedom. God is protecting people. God is trying to put hedges. God is doing this out of love. There was a book that I saw years ago that talked about Deuteronomy, the gospel of love. And Deuteronomy is a retelling of the law. But the point of the book was to say that all of these laws were for the benefit of man. It was a blessing for man in some form or fashion. Yes, it points us to Jesus. Yes, there's medical issues and science and all of that. God knows what he's doing. He created it all. It's going to function a certain way. But the big point was God's laws are for the good of his people. We are still under law, the law of Christ, and the laws that God puts out, the commandments that God puts out for us today are not because he wants to burden us, because he wants us to live free. And there's freedom in being under God's laws. There was freedom for Adam and Eve when they were under the law of God. There was burden and slavery when they rebelled against God, when they disobeyed his commandments. There's freedom when we are submissive to God's will, his commandments, his laws. There's burden and slavery when we are rebelling to him. We're rebelling. So think about those things. All right, that is it for this evening. Just about out of time. Let me close in a prayer. I'll let everybody go.